Okie dokie, folks. I'll move swiftly on. We have a bit of fun to get through tonight. When I say a bit of fun tonight, we have um, a little bit more of a challenging evening of stuff to cover. I'm on to, is it topic 6, I think it is? Topic 6 or topic 7? Anyway, we'll call up the PowerPoints and it'll give us an idea where we're at. And from a message from Janine, and she has asked you to register on the Springboard Plus program. Apparently, now to the instructions, if you haven't already received this by email or whatever, underneath the Zoom link on my Moodle page, I've uploaded a PDF document which says how to complete first registration for Springboard Plus. So all you need to know, and we're never afraid to ask, is in that document. So you can fire away on that at your convenience. So I'm just doing my duty and passing on the information. And you may have already gotten it from Teresa. I don't know. Anyway, moving swiftly on to what we're going to talk about tonight. Right. So as I can hear you. Okay, folks. This evening, what are we going to do? We're looking at transformative learning. And what, you may ask, in the name of God, is that? Damned if I know. It's a fascinating topic, actually. A little bit. I could turn you off and say this is heavy going. It's not. It's not. It might seem, somewhat theoretical, but we'll ground it in the realms of reality in some shape or form, so that it'll, as I say, make sense. And I specifically say make sense because that's the whole purpose of what I'm trying to get through with you tonight, and one of the models in particular. But let's start going through some background on this here before we get into definitions. And we say the volume of education has increased and continues to increase. Yet so do pollution, exhaustion of resources, and changers of ecological catastrophe. And guess what? That was going back to 1974. Say nothing for the current brigade. Now, I put my cards on the table. You know, rule number 1, I'm not PC. Rule number 2, if we were going to have an argument, have the facts. And all this climate changer. Number 3, am I a climate changer? I do my bit. And number 4, what other rules do I have? Ignore all the previous rules because I don't really care at the end of the day. No, I do, of course. But the point about it is, this stuff isn't new, but the important point is education. It's changing and has been changing dramatically, and the way we learn and the opportunities. So if still more education is to save us, it would have to be education of a different kind, and education that makes us takes us into the depth of things. Now, that's a nice introduction. It's a little bit vague, but it brings me into a nice area. And it kind of supports what I've been often saying about having depth of knowledge rather than superfluous, very, very high level perceived knowledge. And we'll be getting into this. So then we have this whole concept of relearning. So this century may well be one of relearning on a grand scale. So this learning needs to be a core part of learning across society, necessitating a metamorphosis of many of our current educational and learning constructs. So what are we alluding to now? We're beginning to look at the types and ways of learning. Now, of course, I simplify this and I say, essentially, we need to take the Cinzano Bianco effect. In other words, any time, any place, anywhere. And also, it's not about traditional attendance in a classroom doing exams. Those days are gone. Well, for the most part. There are still bastions of diehards that would like to hold on to that. However, we have to wake up and start smelling the coffee, to be honest with you. And we all would have amassed learning over the years. If you're in my vintage, a lot. If you're half my age, still substantial learning. Do we recognize that? Do we use it? And can we make value of that? This is where we're heading towards. Now, this is a contentious point, but nevertheless, it was back in 2009. And I think the guy, Tim Burkhead, kind of nailed it. He said the most striking thing about some undergraduates is their dependence, their lack of initiative, and their reluctance to think for themselves. What has propagated that? It's reflected in their often shocking inability to engage in intellectual conversation and to organize their thoughts in writing. New undergraduates seem to expect to be told what to do at every stage. It is almost as though the spoon feeding and teaching to the test culture at school has drained them of independent thought. Harsh words, you might say. Do I agree with it? Absolutely. Would you agree with it? Give me a thumbs up if you agree with it, or a thumbs down.
I see that in work as well. There's no initiative, and it's nearly just box ticking. They just don't want to go out of the rules. I don't know, is it fear that they might get in trouble, or is it fear of, I don't want to say laziness, but it's just there's no drive, I think.
Yeah, all of the above, absolutely. And if you think about this, this is almost like dealing with the R4s from memory, the telling in terms of followership, and putting a lot more pressure on managers, leaders in organizations because of that type of individual, let's just say, coming through. And a lot of it, we know it ourselves in our own education systems. We educate to the Leaving Cert predominantly, lesser so to the Junior Cert, but the Leaving Cert is, it's almost rote learning. Do this, this, and this. Follow this precise process and don't deviate at all, and you'll get the points and so on. And it's now, in some cases that might be a little bit harsh, but it's the unfortunate reality. It's the structure of the Leaving Cert, for starters, is lending itself to this. But outside of the Leaving Cert, we've also gotten into, and I would blame myself to some extent, of a level of mollycoddling and overprotection of our children and kids and so on, and even in some cases, not in my case, but in some cases, people getting extremely litigious, and if they fall off a swing, sue the county council or sue the swing owners or whatever and so on. I mean, that type of mentality has crept in. Is it right or wrong? I would have to declare my words and say I think it's wrong, because we all had silly accidents when we were growing up. I mean, wasn't there a case there last week? Two women tried to sue over the same swing down in Wexford or something like that. I think they fell off it or some stupid thing like that. There's no bounds to the endless stupidity that is out there. There's no doubt about that, and people not taking responsibility. And that's kind of where we're driving to in this, taking initiative, taking responsibility, taking action, and then taking responsibility for their actions without the blame, of other circumstances to deflect from themselves. And that's what's concerning. And this is what the point that Tim Birkenhead is bringing out here, that we tend not to want to take those chances. Exactly that, as you were saying there, Sean, or sorry, Dave, beg your pardon, Dave, as Dave was saying, it's no independent, no motivation, no wanting to think. This is where it's kind of going, or has gone. So they're the kind of brushstrokes or the broad background. So this is I would say, the environment, and these are I use the word, the raw materials you're having to work with nowadays. Is there a way around that? I honestly, I'm not sure. I think we had this situation, I think last week or the week before, and you saw it in my video about resilience. How do I be resilient? I mean, for crying out loud, it's fundamentally, resilience is built through experience. And if you're not going to take chances to experience, well, how the hell can you build resilience? What works and what doesn't work, unless you try it and do it. It's learning by doing. It's action learning, and so on. And similarly, that morphs into work-based learning. Hence this module, for example. And by the way, I'm delighted to say that my old area of work-based learning and action learning, Middlesex University has been ranked one of the top places in the world for work-based learning and teaching, particularly work-based learning and the theories. And the head of it was one of my colleagues over there, Karen Costley. Worth looking at their programs, actually. But nevertheless, it shows a depth. And one of the visiting professors actually comes up here tonight, David Bood from Australia. You'll see him. But we'll look at some of the definitions here and some of the core concepts of learning and why this becomes so important, in terms of transforming yourself and transforming an organization. Now, the very first model that I have up here is what's known as the Seki model. And this is by two guys, Nonaka and Takeuchi. And if we go around this model, I'll just use my cursor here. We start with socialization, externalization, combination, internalization. Now, fundamentally, what happens here, knowledge is passed on through practice, guidance, imitation, and observation. This is what's happening in this area here. So we begin to as individuals, we have tacit knowledge. And this tacit knowledge, we make it external. Tacit knowledge is confined, is codified into documents, manuals, etc., PowerPoints, videos, whatever, books, journals, articles, research articles, so on, instruction manuals, all of the above. Piece of paper, back of a beer mat, whatever, gets our thoughts from our heads into some transfer medium. So this can be spread more easily through the organization. Now, I don't suggest you go up to the MD with a beer mat of a strategy, but nevertheless, it's a way of, as we say, codifying, getting it out of someone's head. Then we go through this process of combination. So once it's out there, this is the simplest form. We say codified knowledge sources, documents and so on, are combined to create new knowledge. It does not extend the company's knowledge base. It just creates new knowledge. So for an individual, Mark writes something down on a piece of paper, writes the formula for something and shows how the formula is used. You pick up that piece of paper and say, oh, okay, now I begin to see that's the formula, and you combine it with your own knowledge around that area. And when you try it out or test or mentally do a little bit of mental agility, say, I understand what his formula is now. I can use that. I internalize it. I make sense of it. And that's what happens here. So an example, and as explicit resources are used and learned, the knowledge is internalized, modifying the user's existing tacit knowledge. So you might have an idea of what the formula might have been beforehand. You might have a difficulty with the formula, or missing some part of the variables or elements of the formula. You come to me and I say, okay, well, let's talk about it. What is the formula, blah, blah, blah. This is how I do it. I externalize what I know. I put down my version of the formula. You combine it with what you and say, oh, I see the missing parameters, or I'm missing variables. Now I'll test it out, put it in. Now I understand. And you come back to me with maybe a slightly modified version of it. And so the cycle begins, and I might look at it and say, yeah, that's interesting. Now I can see what you've done there, and I'll take that and I'll internalize it. I'll run it through the what ifs and test it out and say, yeah, that's a good idea, Dave. That's actually more efficient than my original formula. So why don't we look at it this way? See what's happening? It's going out, and it's only when we talk about it, write it down, and so on, that we make it explicit. So we all have stuff inside in our heads. All sorts of stuff, but it's when we expand or explicate that knowledge or that stuff inside in our heads that it becomes a benefit to other people. That's why my saying, knowledge is power, but sharing it is even more powerful, because oftentimes we have stuff in our heads that we might just take for granted or might find have low value for it. But that could be of extreme value to somebody else. And that's why when you share it, you might be just doing it at the right time for that person to benefit from it and capitalize on it. There's no point in hoarding it, doing the magpie manager on it, saving it for another day and blurting it out. And that's the intrinsic point behind this Secchi model. Now, this model actually works on, two people, even one person putting stuff down on a paper. If I write stuff down and then send it by email and so on and so forth, that's a form of the Secchi. But then again, let's extrapolate this a little bit to a more practical level and say that if there are 4 or 5 of us in a group trying to solve a particular problem, and we all say, well, okay, I'm trying to think of this, and you think of the different roles inside in the ground, the evaluator, plant shaper, and so on and so forth. They're all going through and they're assimilating the information. We take the plant, might be there thinking of this stuff and sitting back and mulling over what everyone else is saying, and then come out with something. They're going through precisely this cycle of trying to make internal sense of it, internalization, and then offer out another suggestion or another format of the solution, or maybe a completely different solution. I might say, I think we're looking at this from the wrong way altogether. Well, maybe if we come from this side, and it gets people thinking, oh yeah, right, bam. And so that's how it works. It's phenomenal how these things can actually be codified and made sense of. And when you understand that there's a process around it, then we can exploit this, and it actually turns what might be a negative overtoned situation into a very more positive type, highly motivated situation, when we can see that there's constructive contribution being made and we're all combining, and provided we're doing it at the right pace. In other words, that there isn't someone that's thinking too far ahead, that's losing people and so on. And that's where, good leadership and management or meeting facilitator can be extremely beneficial in an organization. And this is just another variation of the, and as you can see here, I've put in the spiral into it as well. It's probably in all the other versions of it as well. But it just goes to show, as we begin to share and tacit becomes explicit, becomes internalized, becomes and explicit again, and going through this cycle, our knowledge is getting bigger. The cycle is getting bigger each time. So we're constantly learning, essentially. So if we look socializing, so sharing experiences, observation, imitating, brainstorming, and so on, all these different techniques, writing it down, blah, 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 using all these possibilities. Now this is the first mention here of metaphors, and we will see later on that we might be looking at metacognition and so on. So we might actually create a temporary state of what something might look like while we're trying to fill in the gaps, so to speak. So again, this is just more the same thing, the different techniques that we can use, speaking and writing excellence, formalizations, introduction of new notations, posing the right questions is a way of externalizing, because you might be prompting somebody by through a question to get them to internalize something, to combine it. You might throw out the question which might contain information or contain data which that person can do. You might be throwing out the question and you might not realize that you're saying something, but, let me see. But, what about the different personality types if we look at it from a psychological perspective? And say, oh, we're looking at it from a psychological perspective. It's not just a personality type. So what does it do to the mind? And that might be a question coming out from somebody that might be genuinely interested in wanting to know that, or maybe just wanting to throw out something because it came to their head, but yet it could spark a conversation. So, definitions. And there's a few people here who particularly wants to cover in terms of transformative learning. Now, lo and behold, you're all going through this, by the way. The day you signed up for this this brilliant course, you've started to transform yourselves. That's a given. Okay, so if we look at this here, Meserio, Jesus, transformative learning refers to transforming a problematic frame of reference to make it more dependable. So by generating opinions and interactions that are more justified, we become critically reflective of those beliefs that become problematic. So we transform frames of reference, our own and those of others, by becoming critically reflective of them, of their assumptions, and aware of their context. So that's really powerful, because we're talking about situations. We're talking about the context in which those situations or the problems or the information or the data we're trying to assimilate in is pertinent. And as we talk here, they refer to, where is it here? Problematic frame of reference, a challenge. It's in the context of a particular situation. Problem at work, problem with a fellow employee or a reportee, whatever the case may be. If we then move on and look at Sullivan's definition, it says a deep structural shift in the basic premises of thought, feelings, and actions. It is a shift of consciousness that dramatically and permanently alters our way of being in the world. So because we have a perception or an understanding, perception, not the right word, we have an understanding of a particular situation and the context of it. And then we get some additional information and we look at it in a new light, essentially. Center for Transformative Learning, University of Toronto. Mazzero again comes back and says transformative learning refers to transforming a problematic frame. And that's a repeated slide. Why in the name of God would I have that in a second time? Maybe I was trying to make a point. And I know why, because I've hit the button. Cranton. Transformative learning can occur when learners encounter alternative points of view and perspectives. The 6 and the 9. Exposure to alternatives encourages us to critically question our assumptions, beliefs, and values. And when this leads to a shift in the way we see ourselves or things in the world, we have engaged in transformative learning. Now we're getting to the nub of this. And that's, again, going back to not oversimplifying it, but being precise insofar as it's the 6 and the 9. Looking at things from different points of view and getting a change in our beliefs and our values as a consequence of looking at, hence, emotional intelligence, empathy, and developing those skills or those competencies to a sufficient level that we recognize what we're doing and how we're doing it. And that underpins what we'll see later on is a triple loop learning environment. Okay, so stick with me. Stick with me. So transformative learning can be promoted by using any strategy, activity, or resource that presents us with an alternative point of view. An argument, debate, whatever the case may be. But again, as long as it allows us to see more than one perspective, more than just our own perspective, and we're able to assimilate others' perspectives. And remember, you might be dealing with a number of people, and they'll all have different perspectives. So it no longer becomes just the 6 and the 9. It can be the 6 and the 9 with a 45-degree angle. It can be the 9 with a 90-degree angle. It can be the 6 with a shadow on it. See how it begins to get a little bit more complex depending on what way or how you're looking at the product. And if you're looking at it totally side on, you might not be able to discern that it's the 6 or the 9 and so on. So it becomes more ambiguous. And this is the kind of thing we're trying to, so how do you get someone that's in that total ambiguous zone into a zone where they can recognize or understand or internalize some of what they're seeing, at least some of the data, to enable them to be able to come back up to speed such that we end up almost in the perpendicular 6-9, 6-9. So we're looking at all these multiple perspectives, and that's often what happens in very good conflict or debate and so on. So when we're seeing all these different, now unfortunately, this is why with the lead-in commentary about undergraduates, for example, is that they don't think they've been educated not to recognize how they should be looking at things. If I'd say it's a 9, they're jumping straight up. Don't question. It's a 9. It could be a 6, but if I tell them it's a 9, they'll almost accept it. Now that's taking it to the extreme, of course. Moving on. These are probably...
Sorry, Mark.
Yes.
Quick question there. But do not most of us have the same learning style, let's say, for Leaving Cert that kids have today?
Good question.
Like what I see, what my kids do, the way I learned, and I suppose people in the 80s would be too dissimilar. So why aren't we like them?
That's a good question. Why aren't we like them? I think a lot of the time we have put, well, for starters, we weren't totally tied down to pure points, and we might not have been as aspirational, and it wasn't a given that we were going to third level. Certainly true. The in my case the mid 70s and late 70s as such, and it's almost a case that when I was going to school, you could get a damn good job with the intercert, mind you, and if you went on to do the Leaving Cert, well and good. And third level was aspirational. Not many people would have, well, not the majority, wouldn't have gone at the third level. So the value of the Leaving Cert has dropped in terms of, now it's saying that you must have a degree to get on anywhere. Now you can see there's a bit of a shift at the moment towards apprenticeships and so on, because we as parents have started to push that onto our children as well. You must get a good education, you must get a good, and we've taken it one step further. In terms of the way we have been taught, I think we, again, it's a first world problem. We started to throw resources at students, so we started to power into grinds and so on and so forth. So we started to put a huge, much bigger emphasis on the rote learning. Get this to get your points and move through. And I don't know, maybe the fact that we reward everyone, as I said, you take part in a race now, kids, they all get a medal, first or last, So we've lost that value of, the top 5% being clearly heads and shoulders above most of the rest of the. For example, we would have had inbuilt competition in our classes. We had the A1, A2 classes. I'm sure you probably would have recognized those. You don't have that today. I mean, that would be seen as discriminatory, probably, or unfair or inappropriate. I don't know what terminology they use in it. But when we were growing up, most certainly the A class were considered to be the bookworms. And, those in A1 might have aspired, well, I'd like to be in that class. And if you're in the A2 or A3 class, you're pretty much doomed, you know, in many respects. You weren't encouraged to be doing honors subjects and so on. So that hint of that kind of I call it Christian brother competition. Sorry.
Sal, is it?
No, but that kind of competition doesn't exist anymore inside there. So everyone is treated the same. So I think I'm not. I know I'm not answering your question directly. What has
Yeah,
changed?
no, so like I suppose failure drives success.
It most certainly does.
Yeah, okay.
That's an excellent way of putting it. And and this is why the whole issue about resilience comes up, because we haven't allowed people to fail. We haven't encouraged failure. It's only in recent years where we will say in business, and it was an Americanism. Unless you failed, you haven't succeeded. As an entrepreneur and so on and so forth. So, and then companies began to say, people began to think or talk about, had failed business and wear it as a badge. Again, kind of a little bit of a superficial treatment, whereas had they actually learned anything? And that's fundamentally at the core of all this. If you haven't learned unless you failed, and that's an absolute given, and it actually comes up later on in here as well. And in terms of how we learn, what we learn, and failure is most certainly one of the best educators ever. No matter whatsoever. I mean, I don't know if I told you my story, but I failed my exam on my MBA second year exam. I had to go back and do it on my own. No support, no work groups, nothing at all. Did I get it? Of course I did. I wouldn't have the qualification if I didn't get it. Did I put a challenge down to myself? Yeah. Still finishing the top 5% of my class. I love bragging about that. Wow. Bullshit. Point is, by Jesus, did it help me to focus? Did it focus my mind at 42 years of age to want to succeed because of the failures 3 months earlier? And fortunately, I haven't had too many of those experiences in life. But it's one example that sticks out like a sore thumb in my case of how failure has benefited me. I could have just walked away, not bother. But why? I had invested so much time and effort into myself. There was no one else that was going to benefit from this, only myself, or otherwise. Could have easily thrown the hat at it and walked away, but no, stuck with it. So action learning means failure, and unless you're able to do things and learn from the failure, then you're not learning. It's we don't have the depth of value for something if everything is plain sailing, to use that expression. But let's move on. I hope I've kind of somewhat addressed the question area. So the key theorists include Gregory Bateson. Why do I like Gregory Bateson? Because he was ahead of most of these guys, Argus and Sean and the likes, when it comes to learning, and particularly in the areas of double and triple loop learning. Sullivan is quite good as well. Argus is a very well known writer. Donald Sean, great on reflection and work-based and action learning area. Mesereau, kind of contentious, as you saw above, and we'll see Bawden come up later on. And two of my other favorite writers then are these two guys, Nanaka and Takeuchi. and they would be they look at organizational learning, and they were the first to develop this SECI model that I showed you earlier on. Levels of knowing. Now, this is where we're getting into Arger's and Schoen's areas as such, So we have actions, ideas, then norms, beliefs, values, paradigms worldwide, and then metaphysics or cosmology. So we're getting into the upper elements. But see, at the core of this, at the very start, is actions. So out of actions, we can develop ideas and theories and so on, and these become norms, and we can make assumptions based on theories and depending on values and so on. That's how it essentially works. Now, if we look at the levels or the nested system of learning, we have this knowing about learning. We have this meta learning, which is it's like I'll call it a purgatory state. And then we have the basic learning. So we move from the outside in, we learn, and then we add or augment it. So we pick up some additional learning, but we haven't tried it out. And when we do try it out, it becomes deeper learning, and then we can say that we know about what we're learning. Okay, let's explore that a little bit more. So the first order of change, as we talk about, doing things better. So that's the learning side of it. The second order of change, examining assumptions, do better things. And then the third order, as they call it, the paradigm change, seeing things differently. So now that we know, so when you go through a process, you learn how the process works. Then you think about, well, maybe if I try this process slightly differently, and you test that out, then you can say, yes, and I still get the result. So I'm doing it better now, and I'm getting the correct result. I'm hitting my quality targets, or I'm hitting my objectives and so on, because I modified it. So now we can say we know the process. So now we go and look at it and say, well, do we even need to have that full amount, that process? Could we actually change it? Or are these the precise learning outcomes or the precise objectives we want to achieve? Maybe there is a better way of doing things. And that's where we begin to look at this third order, or seeing things differently. So we see the results of, because we know how we got there, now we want to see the actual end result. Can we change how we got there, and or do we even want to be in this? Would we look at something else altogether? What's the importance of the outcome or not? Okay, I know it's beginning to sound a little bit hairy, but stick with me. And this is where we talk about these three different learning levels. Now, that's learning, thinking, and knowing, basics. Learning, thinking, knowing, learning about learning, learning to learn. And here we're going to get a little bit more. This is the absolute knowledge of learning about learning about learning. Okay, and say, here, Mark, now how many more of these can you get introduced, But you're beginning to move into triple learning. So we have to question the beliefs and values of why we're learning what we're learning. What's the benefit of all this learning? And again, this is where we're going out. So we're creating these double and triple layers onto our basic process of learning, thinking, and knowing. So if we look at the first order, the basic learning, and that's often referred to single loop learning. Learn the job, go and do it. Second, learn the job and learn and do it better. And in this, we're conformist. Then we begin to reform, because we're looking at different ways, slightly better ways of improving the process. And we have a knowledge, a cognition. And here we have a meta, so we think we can do it better. And that's the second order. And then when we go into this third or higher order, so our higher order, deep learning, triple loop learning, epistemic, which is epistemology, the knowledge about learning. And then when we get into that, when we understand why we're learning what we're learning, then we can move into this paradigm shift. And that's where organizations begin to move in different directions, or in a mature direction. So when they understand how they're doing what they're doing, and the people's tacit knowledge becomes more explicit, that all underpins this move and maturing of an organization, because we become better. And that's where we start to identify our core competencies. And learning can be a very powerful competency inside how quickly we adapt. Hence, we get these concepts of agility and lean and so on, because we're becoming more efficient at doing what we're able to do in a knowledge context. So if we look at these mental models, so each learner goes through a period of chaos. confusion and being overwhelmed by complexity before new conceptual information brings about a spontaneous restructuring of mental models at a higher level of complexity, thereby allowing a learner to understand concepts that are formerly opaque. So basically, taking pure chaos or only partial information, we might have some bits of data and we have to try and assimilate, well, put the jigsaw together in our minds and putting the pieces we think are missing. And that's where we begin to form that metacognition. And we start to build these mental models of the missing pieces to come up with what we think is the final picture or the final construct. And that's what we're looking at. And then we begin to stand back and look at, well, how did I actually start to develop those mental models based on that small piece of data? And is it actually the right model that I should be looking for? Is it the map of North America, or is it the map of Asia that I should have been building on this thing? And let's look at it from a different perspective. I was looking at it upside down. So now in actual fact, it should have been South America turned sideways and Africa, interlinked, something like that. That kind of, we begin to form these alternatives, and we might quickly test one or the other to validate what we're thinking. So we have all these different complexities. But at the very start, if you see all the jigsaw pieces on the ground, of course you're going to be overwhelmed. And let's just say all the jigsaw pieces are half them are turned upside down. Even more chaos, more complexity, and we have to go through a process. So our simple model will be to turn them all up in the right direction. Then we start the form process. Let's go for all the edge ones first, and let's see if we make sense of it, and all the different color ones. So we begin to make a model, and then you might say, well, hang on a second, let's not go for all, because they're all very dark pieces anyway, so I could still be here for a month of Sundays, and blah, blah, blah. So you start to build up the processes and the models of how we're going to solve this particular jigsaw. And it's the same inside in work, when we look at all the different variables. If you're in a marketing environment, what are the issues? What are the different customers' perspectives? How can we map all of these, and how do we put ourselves in their shoes and try and understand what they're thinking and looking for in our products? And as I said, each customer will have their own understanding, their own view of quality, and so on. So we have to try and assimilate and package all of these, look for patterns and trends and commonalities amongst these. And the more customers, the more products you have, the more complex this can be, and so on. So if we take it then, journeying through orders of learning involves experience of, one, greater challenges or threats to existing beliefs or ideas, and so more resistance. So if we're, and that's a kind of like the case of, well, this is the way I've always done it, and say, oh, but there's a new formula, there's a new way of doing this. And saying, oh my God, geez, what am I going to do here? So, but look, the old way has worked. I don't want to change, and so on. But sooner or later, you're going to have to relent and try it out, and probably fail embarrassingly, and then go back and try it again. And then we break down our resistance, but we have to find a motivation to want to break down our own resistance to be able to come up to speed. And oftentimes we don't want to be left behind. We don't want to be the stick in the mud in the group. We want to be seen to be proactive as opposed to being reactive. So greater perturbation required to stimulate learning and emergence of new order. So we need a certain amount of chaos, challenge, and threat to stimulate ourselves. Now, I don't mean the manager holding a carrot and stick approach. It has to be from within ourselves that we need to look at a new state. Where do we see ourselves in terms of what we want to achieve, and from our learning and from the particular situation? Greater reconstruction of meaning, which is kind of the same point. So the sense of purpose, the mission as to why we want to learn more about what we're already doing, or why we want to learn more about the way we're doing what we're doing. And then the achievement of greater flexibility and less rigidity of thought. So once you have unshackled yourself from the leave insert approach, do this, and this, and you'll get the result. Now we'll begin to look at things from different perspectives. We're able to very quickly build these mental models. And with more and more confidence and ability, then they're becoming less rigid, so we can be more flexible about how we're doing and the way we're thinking. And over time, for example, you would have all come onto this program, and you have what, 3 modules in this semester, and you'll probably find that at the end of the first semester, that wasn't so bad, and maybe that module was a little bit more challenging. There's a little bit more involved in that, and there's less in the other module. And let's say, for argument's sake, I have a lot more to do for Dave. I don't have as much to do for Mark, and Teresa is different again. And you might be saying, well, now I know my abilities. I've got through the first semester. Now I know how to pitch what I learn, or how to the level of learning I need to commit myself to get through the second semester, even though they're different subjects. Okay, you will have Dave, obviously, but you'll have different subjects. And then you might be saying to yourselves, well, I prefer Dave's style over Mark's style, or Teresa's style over Dave's style, and why couldn't there be more evenness amongst them? And then you have to stand back and say, well, why is it that I'm finding one more challenging than the other, and so on? So we begin to think, and we remove the rigidity of coming in, doing a lecture, doing assignments. It's what you're getting out of it becomes the core to all of this. That's what the professional development is about. It's not about the assignments or modules. These are just enablers to get you to think differently. So more emergence of as a result of learning, which is defined as just essentially making. And then the difference between unwitting self-reference and knowing self-reference, and therefore the possibility of transcendence. No, I'm not frightening you. I don't mean that you're going to morph into some alien being or something like that. But it still means that you can actually use the mirror approach, where you essentially mentally come out of yourself and look at the way you're doing. That's where we're getting into the third loop, where you're looking at yourself, looking at the 9 or the 6, and you're making sense, and you're seeing everything all around you. And you're seeing and absorbing both perspectives at the same time. That's the kind of transcendence we're alluding to, or at least Sterling is alluding to, when we're talking about the self-referencing. And the unwitting self-referencing is that it becomes almost instinctive, that kind of behavior. So we get into this and that's where we're in the knowing level, when we're doing these things almost instinctively. But we have deep thought, and there's deep pattern recognition even at that level, even though it might appear instinctive. We're so good at it. We are deep thinkers. We're not just high level, superficial level thinking. And what we say, and as I say, knowing, seeing, doing. So we have perceptions, dimensions of towards seeing, perception. So an expanded ethical sensibility or consciousness. Knowing, conception, a critical understanding of pattern, consequence, and connectivity. And then doing, the ability to design and act rationally, or relationally, I beg your pardon, integratively and wisely. Well, there is rationality implied in that anyway. So doing, so ability to design and act relationally, integratively and wisely. The wise being having had the knowledge from prior experience. Hence we use, for example, in some programs we have a process for recognition of prior learning, and we go through these types of mechanisms to identify, well, what have you learned previously, and how did you learn what you learned previously? And sometimes it might have no relevance to what you're actually studying, but the process that you had gone through demonstrates that, yes, this subject matter, we can give you credit for that, and so on. That's what Middlesex specializes in actual fact, is recognition of prior learning and their processes within organizations. So people that are coming from the workforce, taking academic programs, can demonstrate that they've amassed knowledge, and the way they amassed knowledge over the working careers to that point in time can be demonstrated through this recognition of prior experiential learning, as we refer to it. So the dimensions of that transformative learning and Schumacher College, I say, once you experience such an educational course, you're changed forever. Is that arrogant or what? Once you but yes, there are some, I won't say life-changing experiences, but there are some nuggets. There probably might have been, even on this program itself, there might have been a couple of instances where, that's really fascinating. I like that. It could have been from any one of the modules whatsoever, or I can relate to that, and that reaffirms what I've already thought, and I'm on, and I'm absolutely sure that some of the comments, certainly that I would have made over the last 5 or 6 weeks as well, you would have said, would have struck a chord with you and said, Jesus, yeah, that happened to me, or I remember that, or yeah, and if you analysed your emotion, you would say, Jesus, yeah, you would have been lifted in terms of your emotionality in recognizing something from a total stranger, being myself or something like that, based on a past experience, and the similarities and convergences of those kind of thoughts can give an uplifting. And then indeed the rest, so some of the stuff we might have been talking about, say, well, geez, I thought this is how it should have been all the time, and in actual fact I was wrong. But learning to say that, the process, and that's now being described and being discussed and presented and so on, so is far more effective or knowledgeable, or that if I had known that, I could have done this differently before. That's what's core to all of this. That's the type of learning that's of value to you, and particularly in a professional context. So if you're just going down your reflective learning for individuals and the institution, so on, so forth, that's just describing the kind of performance or characteristics of a highly effective learning environment, intrinsic value of one's work. So inside in the college, and celebrating diversity, I don't know what that means. Of course I do. Recognizing limitations and a good experience for everyone. Okay, and that would be extremely difficult to evaluate. And certainly if you were attending class, simply because of class dynamics, as in the interaction between people. Some people will be a little bit more knowledgeable, a little bit more worldly wise, and so on and so forth, and other people will feel a little bit intimidated by that, and so on and so forth. So therefore, it would infer that it can't be a good experience for absolutely everyone. Nevertheless, if that person that feels intimidated or not, would say, as worldly or wise as some other students, as long as they know why they feel like that, or why their emotions are like that, then it's a good experience without being negative to yourself. In other words, take the positivity out of everything. Don't look for negativity. So the shape of the global future rests with the reflexivity of human consciousness, the capacity to think critically about why we think what we do, and then to think and act differently. So we're getting into the realms of what I'm trying to get you to develop in reflective practice. In other words, what did we do previously, and how can we change? How can we improve the way we did what we did previously? So asking ourselves the capacity to think critically. So we have to be able to fundamentally critique what we did and how we did it. And that's the starting point of critical thinking. So to summarize, and we're getting towards the end, you'll be delighted to know how we're doing time-wise. And we're not too bad. Jeez, I didn't think I'd be this fast. Transformation learning is a profound shift and expansion of perspective, fourth dimension. So operates at individual, organizational, societal level, is difficult, or it wouldn't be transformative learning. It's not guaranteed, even in a conducive learning environment, is more likely through learning by design. It's independent of prior disposition of the learner, and is necessary given current socio-ecological and economic conditions. You could debate any one of those points. Am I going to this or tonight? Absolutely not. But suffice it to say that once we have the core models and understandings, then we're on the, as I say, we're on the road. So as a last word, it's better to do the right thing wrongly. See, Dave, it's after coming back already. And than the wrong thing better and better. That's learning. And this is Russell Ackoff. That's what resilience is built upon. Better to do the right thing wrongly than the wrong thing better and better. So that's only when we recognize the wrong thing or that we've done it wrongly, then we can go back and change the process of how we did what we did. And lastly, these are just the references that I would have used. Now, in the course of all that, you would have seen reference to David Bood, and you can Google him. He's exceptional in terms of learning and action learning and reflective practice and so on. He's a visiting professor with Middlesex Workplace Learning and Research faculty or centre, and also what is it? He's Australian, yeah. And so essentially, folks, hang on a sec. Now, where am I? I just close down these things and get back to my pad. So we enable that. So, folks, how was that? Any questions?
It was very good. Thanks, Mark.
Not at all. You're more than welcome. It can be a little bit heavy going, and you know it probably can overwhelm people when we start talking about double, triple loop learning and all of this sort of stuff. But really, and there's a lot of material written around this stuff, and you know I've condensed it down to what I believe are the key points of this whole thing, and we will come to later on to one of the core models, which is Kolb's cycle, and that will even begin to make more sense. So right now, there, as with any kind of course, there has to be how to say, a level of trust in terms of the journey. So even though you're forming some levels of metacognition now, you're undoubtedly asking some questions of yourselves. Where is this going, and why am I learning this, and what's, suffice it to say that that's absolutely necessary and it's intentional, because it's a journey we're bringing you on. So some of those internal questions that you already have, as we're going through this SECI model of the program over the course of the program, and this module, you'll begin to get more of the tacit, explicit knowledge experience and you will have those eureka, that's what he meant by the triple loop learning. And now I understand why this action and observation makes sense, and now why it becomes experience. Now, so the models and the concepts will start to gel together. But the real learning then comes from, I have all of this stuff, how do I use it? And that's the journey we're going on over this module. So that's it, folks. I don't have anything else to add to it. It's yep. Any other questions? I just checked. There's nothing coming up in chat.
Hi, Mark.
Oh, yeah. Yes, Michelle.
Am I very loud? Sorry.
No. I just had the speaker turned up, or my headphone turned up.
Sorry, Mark. Would you mind if I ask you a very quick question about the assignment that's due in tonight?
Yeah, sure.
In regards to the word count, you stated that you kind of prefer between 500 to 700 words on each of the tests individually. Is there leeway there if we've gone over slightly?
Yeah, there would be leeway, all right, but yeah, as long as you're not quickly producing uh, a big saga of something or other. Because as long as they're not getting a massive manuscript, it's it shouldn't be too bad. You see, this the objective is to keep it condensed, because yeah. How much are we talking about?
About 10%.
Yeah, I'm usually that flexible anyway, up to plus or minus 10% anyway. Look, I'll be honest with you, I don't penalize on word counts and all that stuff. I use that as a guide. And I don't say, oh, they've written 1,000 words when I only ask for 5 to 700 words and so on. And therefore I'm going to take marks out because they're not expressing themselves efficiently. Not in this one, for starters. That's just that's like examiners' ways of trying to find ways to take marks away, and penalize. Got you there for that. I'm way beyond that. I like to think. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Mark.
Not at all. Anyone else have any questions? And I know you're probably racing now. You've about 2 hours to get your assignments in. You can see people jumping already. Okay, folks. I'm not going to banter on, and I will leave it at that. And if you have any questions, sure, we can take them next week if there's anything of concern. I've seen people dropping like flies here, going out the door. I mean, there must be in a panic to get the last bit of the assignment or add a few words. Anyway, listen, folks, take it easy, and we'll talk to you next week, please God. All right?
Thanks, Mark.
Mark, is there no class next week?
Oh, good question. Geez.
5th, I don't think, is there?
No, it's
What?
reading week, I think, next week, isn't it?
It is reading week, and of course, next Monday night is bank holiday, isn't it?
Holiday, yeah.
I'm not going to be around anyway. No, I'm assuming that there are no lectures next week anyway. It's yeah, we've a week off. Jeez, I wish. Okay, I'll see you Monday week, folks.
Cheers.
All right,
Mark.
take it easy. Bye bye.